Alexandr Dugin is a Russian philosopher, geopolitical thinker, and Heideggerian expert. He's known as Putin's brain. He's written dozens and dozens of books, mostly have not been translated out of Russian. And I wanted to read through this recent article he's published entitled Special Operation Z. Now, I have no opinion on Alexandr Dugin. I don't know him and his work enough, so this is not an endorsement of his views here, but I find this writing very interesting, very apocalyptic, and a useful window to explore what's going on, at least from the Russian perspective, which I think is important. So I'm going to read this article here and would like to know what you guys think. Again, it's entitled Special Operation Z. Special Operation Z is not just the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, not just the rescue of the Russian people of Donbass and the assertion of the sovereignty of the Russian state. This is a fundamentally new round of Russian history, returning us from decades of stagnation to the path of our original destiny. Like the Third Rome, the great Christian empire which keeps the whole world from sinking into the abyss. Reality can be viewed from two sides. Imagine a transparent dial. On the one hand, the clock hand goes as it should, but on the other, in the opposite direction. So where is she going? Clockwise or counterclockwise? In this example, Pavel Florensky based his geometric picture explaining what, quote, imaginary numbers are, for example, I, the root of -1. From this he deduced the exact localization of hell and the interpretation of Dante's vertical travels. Up to some point, I underestimated Florensky, I confess. The same hand of the same clock at the same time, seen from two sides of reality, simultaneously moves in the opposite direction. The spiritual mind and the material mind are on both sides of reality. They observe the same thing, but the coordinate system is reversed. One view of reality is true, the other is imaginary, like the number I. However, the reality is the same. From the side of the spirit, reality is a logical and well-ordered structure. Each of its elements is meaningful, carries an intellectual content built into the overall structure, as in language. From the side of the inverted material mind, at first the thing exists as something indefinite, but given here and now, and only then does it find meaning. From this side, the view of reality states chaotic or fractal chains, constellations of emergent randomness, flashes, and meaningless, therefore black miracles. It is a murky language of things that is easy to approach in a very heavy intoxication or a drug journey through the depths of nonsense. Oligophrenics and probably fish enjoy it without any doping, always. Spontaneous elements are driven into chains according to random principle. What is heavier, brighter, denser, that is the main thing. In the material mind, everything is imaginary. He looks at reality, but perceives its blurry, overturned blots. Economics is a science ink blot. There are no real reasons and reasonable explanations in it at all. Crumbling pieces of objects are mixed with abstractions of money. There is no beginning, no end. Nothing converges, and this is declared a law. They say, the economy exists thanks to crises. Imaginary in economics is not just science, but the very field of consideration. It does not exist. It is an aberration of vision, a defect in position. In order to begin to understand at least something in real dramatic and extremely heated events, it is first necessary to go to the other side of reality, to swim out of a material fragmentation, to go out of the sucking imaginary of all types of materialism and economism, and then it becomes crystal clear what is happening. There is nothing more logical and consistent than what is currently unfolding in Russia, Ukraine, and the world. But in order to grasp this, one must abandon the pathological occupation of combining semi-material, materialistic fragments of a torn reality, trying, like dyspomaniacs or degenerates, to build an explanation from them. Gas prices, the SWIFT system, planes on lease, Galkin escaped, discovered a biolaboratory. Trushkins poisoned pigs and stole the DNA of the Slavs. All these are imaginaries seen from under reality. Yes, all these disparate things and events exist. But while we look at them from below, from the position of material rationality, they move in a chaotic stream, and most importantly, in the opposite to themselves direction. They confuse and confuse us. In a sense, stupidity bewitches. When everything is calm, we don't even notice what a deep and dense turbidity we live in. But now it is restless, and will not become a calm again soon, if at all. This is a chance to look at the dial of the world in history, the people and the state from the right, not imaginary side. From the point of view of the spirit, looking at the dial from the right side, in Russia as a spiritual and intellectual phenomenon, in Russia as an idea, in eternal Russia, after the end of communism, spiritual transformation and overcoming the materialist paradigm were on the agenda of the late 20th century. We were destined to return to the highest level of sacred history, where Russia is, quote, that katikon, the retainer, to katechon, and the place for go katethon or katethon, the retainer, was vacant, more precisely reserved. This is called the throne, prepared for etmasya. The man of destiny was to come to correct the Russian way and guide our ship to the last battle. Our country was created for the last battle, and all our historical wars and victories are just preludes to it. This suggested a complete break with the West, as with the civilization of the enemy, adversary, Antichrist. Return to a deep Russian values and the Russian mission. Creation of completely autonomous and sovereign statehood without any reference to the norms of the West, capitalism, democracy, parliament, human rights, network technologies, gender politics, etc. Building a new society based on a new political theory, fourth political turn, where the church, the empire, the people, and justice are at the center. Having returned to its trajectory, Russia, having emerged from the communist era, was called upon to preserve the continental state, held together by the empire and the Eurasian ideology. There were no republics, including no Russian Federation, in the plans of Providence. We returned to the fulfillment of the mission for which we were created by God. But the devil was vigilant, attentive, and awakened, and led us astray. Having gone through the difficult path of restoration, first of all spiritual, and then material, we would enter a new round of confrontation with the West, with the, quote, civilization of the Antichrist, which during this time would become more and more openly satanic. The destruction of sex and families, preparation for the transfer of power to artificial intelligence, the total degeneration of morals, the dominance of extremely perverted philosophies such as postmodernism or LLC. Our fate was written in golden letters in heaven, and was read by Russian czars, saints, elders, ascetics, warriors, philosophers, poets, and artists from the first century of Holy Russia. We had to do just that, and that would be reality, moving clockwise. But we didn't just turn off this path. We collapsed, breaking through the bottom into a sub-reality. And the movement began in the opposite direction, in the imaginary world, in the silt of being located under matter. Further, everything is known. Instead of a break with the West, its blind and crooked copying and obsequious worship, liberals, reformers, Yeltsin's 90s. Instead of turning to Russian roots, cosmopolitanism, and open Russophobia, when everything Russian was equated with, quote, red-brown, a coven of liberalism, postmodernism, and, quote, modernization, where the same West acted as the standard of modernity. Instead of sovereign statehood, an attempt to integrate on miserable grounds into the global West, loss of independence, external control, destruction of the best in Soviet society, plunders of resources, imitation of the Western political, social, economic, and cultural system. Instead of the revived Russia-Eurasia as a single state of the great empire, the pole of the multipolar world, there was a collapse of the USSR and the construction of ugly, imitative structures at the behest of the West. At the same time, the West supported nationalism and even Nazism everywhere except Russia, since Russian identity is not national, but imperial. Those imitative nationalists who were in small numbers in Russia were carefully supported by the West in order to destroy the Eurasian imperial unity from within. That is, we began to do the exact opposite of what we were supposed to do. We forgot about the side of the spirit in general. Everything came down to material indicators, and even then forged in the interests of the corrupt elite and the Western masters. In the 1990s, Russia was ruled by the devil. It was anti-Russia. That is, the exact opposite of what it was supposed to become. Everything in the post-Soviet space was anti-Russia in the 90s. Not only Ukraine, but also the Russian Federation. Therefore, Putin emerged from the depths of his own anti-Russia. It was necessary from the point of view of the logic of the spiritual side of Russian history. Gokatikon, restraining, man of destiny, but impossible from the point of view of material causal processes, Western agents, the oligarchy, and the degenerate opportunists who made up the elite of the 90s. They, however, are still almost everything in its place, completely controlled power. And yet Putin came because he had to come. From that moment began a long journey out of the swamp. It was slow, that it often gave the impression that there was no movement at all. We delved into the matter, sacredly observed a liberalism, delved into capitalism and rushed into the WTO, engaged in modernization, joined with enthusiasm in Western networks and numbers in postmodern culture, imitated the West in everything. That is the power of the devil, which developed in the 90s, continued. Yes, but with one exception. Putin added sovereignty to the infernal plan. But this was an internal contradiction. According to globalism, the sovereignty of states should be weakened and reduced, not increased. Thus began the confrontation. It had many stages. The Munich speech of 2007, the events of 2008 in the Caucasus, Crimea and Donbass in 2014, and finally a special military operation now in the spring of 2022, Operation Z. Operation Z is the exit to the final round of history. Putin led the country from under the dial to the reverse side, from how it is to how it should be. Following sovereignty like Eridan's thread, Putin increasingly entered into a deadly confrontation with the West. When Russia itself was on the side of the devil, no one noticed this. When she began to get out from under his influence, the seriousness of the situation began to be fully realized. In 1991, a decision was made that was completely opposite to the Russian fate. Everyone was responsible for it, peoples, states, cultures, except for those who accepted it, who applauded it, and who took advantage of it. Today, people are dying en masse in Ukraine just because Russia fell through the bottom in 1991, sharply and immediately. This is a geopolitical, moreover, a global catastrophe. It's easy to fall, incredibly difficult to take off. It is easy to be a stone, difficult to be a bird, and even more difficult to be an angel. For 22 years we have been climbing, and only now the surface of Florensky's dial is visible. We are still inside the mind of the devil, the internet, progress, technological development, oil and gas prices, sanctions, rules of international relations, liberal dogmas, and the capitalist way of life. But we are already seeing a raging Leviathan, taking away its poisonous gifts from us by force. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, brands and resorts, gas pipelines and payment systems are closed. The property of oligarchs in the West is taken away. Offshore companies turn out to be unreliable. They think we can't take it. If you remain under Florensky dial and frantically try to reproduce the diabolical civilization on your own, then you definitely won't be able to withstand it. And their calculation is enough. The thread of Iodine led us to the exit of the cave, but is no longer functional. We must take the last and decisive step upward. Sovereignty is no longer enough. An attempt to repeat Western civilization, opposing it in a limited format on 1/6, and today alas less, of the land will end in quick failure. This is not possible and it is not necessary. This is a trick. Sovereignty led us to special military operation, and this is exactly right. But then something else is needed. It is necessary to get out of the mud of history once and for all. What is happening now is exactly what should have happened. The last battle of light and darkness, us and them, Eurasia and the Atlantic. She started. With the completion of the special military operation, it will not end. On the contrary, everything will really begin only then. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but to think means to get ahead of ourselves. The future is created in the mind. If this is the correct future, clockwise on Forlansky's dial.